Pop the champagne and let's rejoice. Today, Victorians, we received patch 1.04, the first patch that's come to Victoria 3 since it released. And as you can see on screen, there's a lot to discuss. Shooketh Victoria is even more Shooketh, by the way, because they've changed the colour of the subscribe button. So whatever colour it may be for you, please do consider subscribing for all kinds of Victoria 3 gameplay and news and content. But without any further shameless self-promotion, let's jump straight in. The first changes that I'd like to discuss are changes to the economy. Of course, we've received a wide variety of changes from AI, diplomacy, and all sorts, but these ones matter. Take a look on screen at the minute. You're seeing the changes in real time. Specifically, we're talking about changes to wages, and this is something that I've recommended people abuse since the game first came out, because I always felt like the downside to having low wages, especially in the early game, or an economy that isn't really that liberalized, were really insignificant. Now they are much more impactful, and having higher wages is even better than it used to be before. The PB interest group are now included with the intelligentsia in those government wages, so you'll get approval for them as well. You'll also lose approval and prestige, of course, if you cut their wages. So there's a much more significant impact on the government wages front. This was always impactful in the later game, maybe, as the intelligentsia start to rise to power, but now it's potentially even better. Also on the military wages, of course, they changed slightly, but not quite as significantly. Slashing military wages anyway will now reduce the training rate, so there's certainly a strong penalty to slashing it down, and of course it will continue to impact the approval of the armed forces interest group. Overall, I think this is a nice change to the first part of the economy. We have more changes coming in terms of laws, slavery, AI, diplomacy, you name it, but as a first initial change, I really like this. Government wages now better than they were, better earlier in the game potentially for a wider variety of countries, and also we should see them interact with the rest of the changes in this patch to make the legal and law system slightly better. Let's move on now and talk about some other changes. Now we'll move to politics. Firstly, there's an increased chance of progressive political movements, those dastardly liberals, appearing over the course of the game. So we should see that happen just a little bit more. Movements to preserve now have a larger effect on the chance for a law to stall, making it harder to pass laws opposed by powerful groups. This, of course, is interrelating also with legitimacy and what groups are in your government, how strong they are. We'll see some more changes on that as we move through, but it's nice to note that that is just a little bit more difficult. It was quite easy to pass laws, even with a relatively low chance. Nice to see that being nerfed. Movements, also political ones, for or against slavery and government principles will be more likely to radicalize. So again, there's a radical underbelly here. However, there were some also slight reductions to radicalism. Propagandists from the intelligentsia trait have been reduced in their radicalism, so you'll need to worry about them just slightly less. And also, there's reduced effects on guaranteed liberties on loyalists and radicals' growth. That one, a little more mundane and boring, but all you need to know is that there's a reduced effect of them guaranteeing to be more loyal or more radical. Interesting changes there to the political system, largely to movements. Let's now move in and have a look at something that relates to it fairly well, and that is, of course, the economics and political changes that they're making to slavery. Here you can see the slavery laws on screen. Prepared this earlier. Of course, landowners prefer the legacy ones. Then you have outright banning it. And then somewhere in the middle, debt slavery. And that's the one that's been changed in this update, really almost exclusively. Debt slavery will no longer enslave additional populations when it reaches 20% overall slaves compared to your pop. Also, they've reduced the max number of enslaved pops each week down to 10% of what it was. It used to be 5% of state population, now it's 0.5%. So they've significantly reduced the impact of this law. However, it can enslave pops up to wealth level 9 now, reducing an impact as they get wealthier. So impacts more, but in a much less significant way. Moving along to something that all of us No Friend fans will like, AI changes in Victoria 3. Let's start with the diplomacy ones. The AI is now less likely to back down to your demands in diplomatic plays, and thus slightly more likely to get involved in diplomatic plays that interest them. Basically, AI aggression has been toned up, is a quick way to summarize that when it comes to diplomatic plays. The AI is also more keen on swaying countries to its side if it's outmatched, something that I often am looking to take advantage of if I'm outmatched. but I don't feel like, at least me in my gameplays, I've ever really been swayed particularly well by the AI. So it would be interesting if they would start to make better use of that, at least in my gameplay. We also have some changes to war. The AI is now a lot, quote unquote, more focused on taking land-adjacent states and conquering contiguous land areas in general. This feels like a necessary improvement. Nice to hear. They might be more better, there you go, at fighting. And also they've increased the AI aggression against unrecognized countries, those countries that haven't been formally recognized in their political area, but may very well be fairly strong. Nice to see. Moving along, of course, we have more changes to come, and some sneaky ones that I'll talk about toward the end of the video that weren't included in the patch notes, but will be coming in future updates. However, we had a slight change to the interface, something that is actually, in my opinion, probably a lot better than many grand strategy games of the past, however, definitely has some work to do. As a relatively minor change here, or at least just one, they've improved revenue predictions when you construct buildings. So when you go into your buildings tab and you go to place a building, you'll notice a lot of the time it says that they'll all produce negative revenue. It says it all the time. Sometimes it's true, sometimes it's lying though. In my experience, it doesn't seem to properly take into account the impacts of building those buildings and how they impact your markets. i.e., if I build more small arms factories, it will help my economy operate more efficiently, we'll be able to pay better wages, etc. Hopefully it's starting to take more things into account in that calculation. I'll have to playtest it to find out. Speaking of playtesting it to find out, one of the most powerful things, in my opinion, in Victoria 3, or at least one of the easiest ones to do, depending on who you are, is colonization. They've made a couple of changes to how colonization works, or at least the impact of it, and you'll also see a little bit of a theme in some of the changes that I'll discuss slightly later in this video. It's all about native uprisings. Native uprisings now get a significant, quote-unquote, bonus to their combat capabilities, especially on the defensive. This matters, of course, to them because they tend to be, not always, but tend to be outnumbered, and maybe more likely to be on the defensive in a weird way. So that'll be quite neat to see how it plays out, but they've also reduced the chance of uprising occurring when provinces have been colonized. Nice. There are also a variety of bug fixes. I'm not going to spend minutes going over all of them. However, a couple that did impact me were right at the top. Flotillas regain their morale after naval battles, so they won't just sit there tired forever. There was also a bug fix where this one impacted me only once. I'd be interested to know if you've faced any of these bugs. Anyway, this one impacted me once. Basically, in a war, your generals will just stand by if you've completed another war, like I'm doing here with Brazil. Didn't happen in this gameplay because this is on the new patch. It is, of course, patch 1.0.4. And on balance, looking at all of those changes, I think it's been a fairly decent one. However, there's more to come, of course. If you go onto the Twitter page of Martin Anwood, who is the game director of Victoria 3, you'll note some more significant changes that we can probably expect in future updates. I thought I'd cover them too, because they kind of suggest the way that the game will be moving forward, and maybe give us some hints at what we can expect. The first one, that I've just thrown down slightly smaller on screen, is about legitimacy. Again, this is about laws and passing laws, something that has been changed a bit in this patch. What they've suggested is that they'll make laws, in this case it's legitimacy, of course, who's in government and who's ultimately passing our laws. Here they say that one of the first mechanics they'll be tweaking is just that, increasing its impact and making it so its share of votes in government matter more, especially for democracies. This is really important. The government, or the political parties in government, should have more of a sway, particularly in democratic states where that's kind of what they're there to do. Nice to see that they'll be changing that. Legitimacy at the moment is slightly easier to gamify than some of the other systems in this game, relatively speaking. Hopefully they'll be able to tighten that up a little bit. The other change that they've hinted at, it's teaser time again. One of the things they're looking at for an upcoming patch is to balance the cultural religious tolerance laws. You lose authority as you move towards separation, and also lose the impact of course, the religious group. There are sometimes, though, not very many upsides. They've noted here that they'll have the sort of shift around those restrictive laws. They'll increase the loyalty of pops who accept them, so that there is actually a trade-off involved. You'll be able to bring more loyalty and therefore, of course, productivity and stability out of the people who accept your laws against people's personal rights and freedoms of expression and blah, blah, blah. The idea here is that there'll be more balance on both sides, because at the moment, some legal decisions, often that one, are a little bit out of balance in Victoria 3. There's one path that's very strong and others not so much. Sometimes that will have to be the case, of course. Other times it doesn't need to be. Those are all the changes that I'll be covering in this video. Thank you very much for watching me. I'm loving covering Victoria 3, and I hope that you'll enjoy watching it, or at least following along in its journey with me in future. Thanks so much, everybody. I'll see you next time.